What's up, everyone? Tera Roberts here with Fantasy Alarm, and we are talking free agency deep cuts for week 4. At quarterback this week, I have 2 options to give you. The top option for me is Jared Goff. Goff cooled off in week 3 after a huge week 2 performance, going from 4 touchdowns all the way down to 1 touchdown and 1 interception. But I think what we saw in week 3 was the Jared Goff floor. With Amon-Ra St. Brown, Goff is a very stable option with a solid floor and upside, and that's why I love him for streaming. The only problem this week is that St. Brown is questionable, and if St. Brown is out, I am not streaming Jared Goff. And that is why I have to give you a second option this week, which is Marcus Mariota. Marcus Mariota has a positive week 4 matchup against a Cleveland defense that just let Mitch Trubisky have his best game of the year. And while that's not saying a lot, I can back it up with Cleveland's week 2 performance where they gave up a 300-yard, 4-touchdown game to Joe Flacco. Mariota should be a fine streaming option. At running back, Jerick McKinnon is still my preferred deep waiver wire add for his long-term value. Clyde Edwards-Helaire has still yet to have more than 10 carries in a single game this year. The Chiefs just aren't running the ball. They're a bottom 10 team in rush attempts this year. The value is in the pass catching back, and that is what Jerick McKinnon is. He is 1 injury away from being a reliable RB2. At wide receiver, there are some big swings that happened in roster percentages with the top low-rostered waiver wire ads for the week, and while everyone was rushing out and grabbing Romeo Doubs and Isaiah McKenzie, the good news is that all that focus left some solid options with low roster percentages. Zay Jones is still only 26% rostered in Yahoo leagues, and while the Jags' week 4 matchup against Philadelphia is definitely a major challenge, Jones is still a good long-term value for you to have on your bench. Most players within the Jags offense have been incredibly undervalued. And I think a lot of that has to do with fantasy managers holding on to the perception that the Jags are the same struggling team from 2021, but this is a completely different offense under Doug Peterson. Christian Kirk is producing as a top 10 receiver. There's enough volume for Zay Jones to be a flex option. And while we won't see 20-plus fantasy points game on a weekly basis, Jones is still a must-add with great upside if the Jags can stay strong offensively. Mack Hollins is still only 22% rostered in Yahoo leagues, and Hunter Renfrow is still not practicing. Hollins is coming off an 8-reception game for 158 yards and 1 touchdown. If Renfrow misses time, you can start Mack Hollins as a low-end flex option with upside in an offense that has to throw the ball for high volume. Even if Hunter Renfrow returns, it's still worth adding Hollins in deep leagues just to see where his role kind of ends up because he's had a higher than 80% snap count in all 3 of his games. Greg Dortch is also a good add. If this video sounds repetitive, it is. I recommended him last week, and I'm recommending him again because very few fantasy managers picked him up, and those who didn't missed out on 9 receptions for 80 yards. Dortch is quietly producing top 20 numbers and yet only rostered in 28% of Yahoo leagues. Dortch is on a time limit, and that's the main reason why, because it's hard to imagine that he retains this level of production once Rondale Moore is healthy and DeAndre Hopkins returns from suspension. But for right now, Dortch is a plug-and-play flex option. With Sterling Shepard on IR, unfortunately, Kadarius Toney and Wan'Dale Robinson dealing with injuries, and Kenny Golladay being Kenny Golladay, Richie James is the last man standing in the Giants receiving corps. The Giants will likely lean heavily on Saquon Barkley, but James can be a good add in deep leagues needing a short-term solution. At tight end, all my favorite streaming options for the first 3 weeks are now too high rostered to qualify, which is a good sign that we are doing things right here. So this week, the guy I'm recommending is Evan Engram. Coming off of a strong week 2 performance, catching 7 of 8 targets, Engram only had 1 reception in week 3. But this was against a Chargers defense that is ranked in the top 15 of lowest fantasy points allowed to tight ends. But to give that number some context, they are in the top 15 after facing Darren Waller and Travis Kelce. So the Chargers have been very strong against tight ends, and I will give Evan Engram a pass for last week and recommend him this week in a matchup against Philadelphia where the Jags will likely need to continue pushing high volume to keep up with Jalen Hurts. And that wraps things up for this week's free agency deep cuts. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to Fantasy Alarm, and come back next week for more deep waiver wire ads.